A teenage fisherman noticed a floating island with houses in open water, a place that wasn't marked on any map. When he moved closer, he realized it was hiding something disturbing and dangerous that was never meant to be discovered. Watch till the end, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're watching from. The boy woke before the sky began to lighten, long before the birds or the distant engines along the shore. He did not need an alarm. His body knew the hour as well as it knew hunger. The room was cold, the air heavy with the smell of damp wood and old nets drying near the wall. He lay still for a moment, listening to the water beyond the thin walls of the house, to the slow breathing of those who slept nearby. Every morning began this way, with silence and calculation, because mistakes here were expensive. He rose quietly, pulling on clothes that had been mended more times than he could remember. The fabric was thin from years of salt and sun, but it was clean, folded carefully the night before. On the table stood an empty mug and a small loaf wrapped in cloth. He tore off a piece, chewed slowly, already thinking about the water, about the weight of the nets, about how much he needed to bring back to make the day worth it. Fishing was not a choice or a dream. It was arithmetic. Fish meant food. Fish meant medicine when someone fell ill. Fish meant the ability to keep going one more week without borrowing. Outside, the air carried the chill of dawn. The village slept behind him, low houses pressed close together as if to keep warm. The path to the shore was familiar down to every stone that could twist an ankle, every patch of mud that grew slick after rain. He walked it without thinking, shoulders slightly hunched, his breath steady. At his age, other boys talked about leaving, about cities, about things they would do someday. For him, someday was a luxury. Today was all that mattered. His boat waited where it always did, pulled halfway onto the stones, its paint chipped, its wood darkened by years of water. He checked it automatically, fingers running over the worn edges, the rope, the patched places along the side. Then the nets, folded with care, smelling of salt and old fish. Everything was in its place. It had to be. Out on the water, forgetting something small could become something fatal. He pushed off as the horizon began to pale. The oars dipped soundlessly, the boat gliding into the open water. This was the only place where his shoulders loosened, where his thoughts stopped pressing so tightly against each other. He knew the water the way others knew streets. He read its surface, the faint patterns of current, the way birds circled or ignored certain patches. He followed a route burned into memory, guided by distant trees and bends in the shoreline that had not changed since he was small. The first nets went out carefully. He watched how they sank, how the water accepted them. He waited, counting the minutes without looking at the sky. Time moved differently out here. It stretched, then snapped back suddenly when he checked the haul. The catch was modest, not enough to relax him, but not enough to panic either. He reset the nets, adjusting position slightly, following instinct sharpened by years of necessity. That was when he noticed it. At first, it was nothing more than a dark interruption far ahead, barely visible against the lightening sky. He squinted, shading his eyes with one hand. The water there looked wrong, heavier somehow. He told himself it was a trick of the morning light, a drifting mass of debris, maybe a barge someone had anchored overnight. Things appeared and disappeared on the water all the time. He kept fishing, but his eyes returned to the shape again and again. As the light grew stronger, the interruption refused to fade. It did not drift like debris. It held its position too neatly. He changed his angle slightly, rowing a few strokes closer, curiosity tugging at him despite his better judgment. The shape resolved slowly, and with it came a quiet unease he could not explain. What he saw did not belong here. It was not flat like a platform or sharp like a rock. There were lines, straight and deliberate. There were vertical edges that caught the sun differently, and above them, a darker mass that looked almost like foliage. His heart beat a little faster. He told himself again that there was a simple explanation. There always was. Still, he altered his course, keeping his movements cautious, measured. He did not rush. Rushing led to mistakes. As he drew closer, the truth became harder to deny. The dark shape rose from the water in layers. Wooden platforms, structures, roofs, low and uneven, like those of poor houses built in haste, and trees, real trees growing from the center of it, their leaves barely moving in the morning air. It was a village. The realization settled over him slowly, like cold water soaking into cloth. A village where there should have been nothing but open water. He stopped rowing and let the boat drift, listening. There were no voices, no movement. The place sat quietly, almost peacefully, as if it had always been there and he was the one intruding. He scanned the water around it, looking for boats, for smoke, for any sign of life. There was nothing. The silence was complete. Too complete. His instincts told him to turn back, to mark the place in his mind and forget it. But another part of him, the part that had learned to notice small changes in the water because small changes meant survival, refused to let go. He edged closer, careful to keep his oars from splashing, details sharpened. The platforms were lashed together with rope and metal fastenings. The houses were simple, built of rough wood, their walls patched and repaired. This was not a temporary raft. This was not something thrown together overnight. It drifted slightly, just enough for him to notice the pull of the current beneath it. Whatever anchored it was loose or gone. The thought made his stomach tighten. A place like this did not simply appear by accident. The sun climbed higher, and with it came urgency. He had been out longer than planned. The nets needed checking. The fish he already had needed to be brought home. His family would be waiting, measuring the day by his return. He hovered there, torn between caution and a pull he did not yet understand. In the end, necessity won. He turned the boat away, forcing himself to look forward instead of back. As he rowed, he fixed the image in his mind. The number of houses, the trees at the center, the way the platforms connected. He memorized the position relative to the shore, the angle of the light, the direction of drift. All the way back, the water felt different beneath him, familiar but changed. When he reached the shore, the village rose around him again, pulling him back into its small, pressing concerns. He handed over the fish, accepted the quiet relief in his family's eyes, answered questions with nods and short replies. No one noticed his distraction. They had their own worries. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw roofs on water, trees growing where they should not, empty spaces where people should have been. The image refused to loosen its grip. Before dawn, as the house lay silent once more, he knew the truth he had been avoiding. At first light, he would go back. He left before anyone else in the house stirred, moving with the same careful silence he used when returning late from the water. The decision had already been made sometime in the night, in the space between half sleep and waking. He did not announce it even to himself. He simply acted. The nets were lighter than usual, his movements faster, more deliberate. He carried only what he needed, though he was not fully aware yet of what that was. A length of rope, a knife, a small cloth sack folded and tucked beneath the seat of the boat. Nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would slow him down. The water was calm again, deceptively so, as if yesterday had been nothing more than a trick of light and fatigue. But he knew better now. He followed the remembered angle without hesitation, letting the shoreline slip away behind him. As the sun rose, the surface of the water brightened, revealing every ripple and reflection. The farther he went, the more the sense of intrusion returned, the feeling that he was moving towards something that did not want to be seen. The island appeared sooner than he expected. It sat low in the water, unchanged from the day before, its outline steady against the morning glare. Seeing it again brought no relief. If anything, it sharpened his unease. This confirmed that it had not been a mirage, not something temporary carried away by current or wind. It existed, solid and deliberate. He slowed well before reaching it, letting the boat drift while he studied every detail. The platforms were clearer now, bound together by thick ropes darkened with age. The houses were simple, their roofs uneven but intact, made of dried reeds or straw layered carefully against rain. In the center, several trees rose from a patch of soil contained by wooden frames, their roots somehow held above the water. It was an impossible sight and yet entirely real. Still no voices, no smoke, no sign of people. He circled slowly, listening, watching for movement. The water around the island was marked by faint lines where boats had come and gone, disturbed sediment that had not yet settled. This too felt recent. He chose a place along the outer platform where the wood looked strongest and guided the boat in, tying the rope quickly but securely. He left enough slack to push off in a moment if needed. The first step onto the island made the boards groan softly beneath his weight. The sound carried farther than he liked. He froze, listening, heart pounding, but nothing answered. He moved forward again, carefully, testing each step. The wood was damp but firm, worn smooth by many feet. The smell reached him almost at once. Not rot, not abandonment. Smoke that had settled into the wood, the faint sourness of old food, wet fabric that had not yet dried. These were not the smells of a place long deserted. They were the smells of interrupted life. He approached the nearest house and paused outside the doorway. The door hung slightly ajar, its latch undone. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through cracks in the walls. He waited, giving himself one last chance to turn away, then stepped inside. The room was small and spare, but not empty. A table stood against one wall with 2 cups still resting on its surface. A pot sat nearby, its bottom darkened by use. A mat lay folded in the corner. Everything was in order, too much so for a place left to decay. It looked as though the people who lived here had expected to return. He moved farther in, drawn by a stack of paper on the table. They were school notebooks, their covers worn soft by handling. He picked one up carefully, flipping through pages filled with uneven handwriting and simple exercises. Names were written at the top in a child's careful script. Dates, not old enough to blur into irrelevance. He swallowed, feeling a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. In a crate near the wall, he found clothing, neatly folded. Shirts too small for any adult, trousers with patched knees, a sweater mended again and again at the elbows. He touched the fabric with 2 fingers, as if it might be warm. It was not. He stepped back outside, his mind racing. One house could be an anomaly, a mistake. He moved to the next, each step heavier than the last. This one held a few tools, nets mended and coiled with care, a small ledger filled with numbers and marks he did not yet understand. The writing was tidy, methodical. Whoever lived here valued order. In the third structure, he found signs of haste, a bowl with dried remnants clinging to its sides, a loaf of bread wrapped, but never eaten. Footprints tracked dirt across the floor, not yet smoothed by time. They led to the door and stopped there. The realization came slowly, settling like a weight on his shoulders. People had left this place quickly. Not after planning, not after packing. They had gone as they were. He stepped back onto the platform, breathing deeply, forcing himself to look around with clearer eyes. The pathways between houses were worn, trodden smooth by repeated use. The ground around the trees bore the marks of play or work, shallow depressions where feet had lingered. This was not a temporary camp. Families had lived here. A sound reached him then, faint but unmistakable. The distant hum of an engine. He turned sharply, scanning the horizon. Far off, a thin line disturbed the water's surface, moving slowly but purposefully. A boat. Too far to make out details, but close enough to set his nerves alight. He did not panic. Panic wasted time. He moved back toward his own boat, choosing his steps carefully, unwilling to leave obvious signs of his presence. Before climbing in, he reached back into the house and took one of the notebooks, sliding it into his cloth sack. He hesitated only a moment, then tucked a small piece of clothing beside it. Not as evidence, as proof to himself that what he had seen was real. He pushed off quietly, the rope slipping free, and let the current carry him away from the island before he began to row. The engine sound remained distant, but it did not fade. He kept his head down, forcing his breathing to slow, his movements to remain steady. Only when the island had shrunk to a dark shape behind him did he allow himself to look back. From a distance, it appeared peaceful again, harmless, almost beautiful in the morning light. But he knew now what lay within its walls. By the time he reached the shore, his thoughts were already forming into questions that would not leave him. Who had built this place? Who had lived here? And why, if they had left willingly, had they left everything that mattered behind? He did not sleep much after that second visit. The images returned the moment he closed his eyes. The notebooks, the folded clothes, the bowl left half finished. He replayed the scene again and again, searching for some harmless explanation he might have missed. There was none. The island was not abandoned by choice. Whatever had happened there had happened quickly, and someone had wanted it that way. The notebook lay hidden beneath a loose board near his sleeping place. He took it out only once, when the house was empty and quiet, turning the pages slowly, careful not to crease or tear anything. The handwriting was neat but uneven, the kind that belonged to children learning discipline through repetition. Simple tasks, numbers, dates. There was nothing dramatic written there, nothing that explained why the island existed or why it had been emptied. And yet that ordinariness was the most disturbing part. Life had been happening there, normal, small life, and then it had stopped. By morning, he knew he had to return, not out of curiosity anymore, but because the questions had grown teeth. He needed to understand what the island really was. He needed to know who had controlled it. This time he prepared more carefully. He left at an hour when most fishermen were already out on the water, making his departure less noticeable. He packed light but deliberately, choosing tools that could help him open hidden spaces or retrieve items tucked out of sight. He did not bring the notebook with him. That felt too risky. Instead, he committed its contents to memory and trusted himself to recognize what mattered if he saw it again. The island greeted him with the same quiet stillness, but it no longer felt neutral. It felt watched, not by eyes but by absence, by the sense that someone had once been responsible for everything here and might return at any moment to finish what they had started. He moved with greater confidence now, stepping onto the platform without hesitation. He knew where the boards creaked, which paths were most worn. He let his gaze travel beyond the obvious, toward the places people usually hid things when they did not want them seen. Under benches, beneath floorboards, inside containers that looked empty at first glance. His instincts proved correct. In the second house, beneath a loose plank near the wall, he found a shallow compartment. Inside lay a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. His pulse quickened as he unfolded them. These were not school notebooks. These were records. The pages were filled with columns and symbols, numbers repeated with methodical precision. There were dates marked at regular intervals, each accompanied by tallies and abbreviated notes. At first, the meaning escaped him, but as he read on, patterns emerged. These were not personal accounts. They were operational. He sat on the floor, sorting the pages carefully. There were references to quantities that exceeded what a single family could produce, lists that repeated over weeks and months. Beside them, short marks that likely indicated approval or completion. Shifts. The word did not appear explicitly, but the structure was unmistakable. Blocks of time divided cleanly, responsibilities rotating in a way that spoke of management, not survival. Someone had organized the labor here. Someone had expected output. He found another ledger nearby, this one thicker and more worn. It contained names or what passed for names, initials, numbers, codes, no surnames, no identifying details. It was a system designed to keep people faceless, replaceable. The deeper he went, the clearer the picture became. The island was not a refuge. It was a workplace, a controlled environment where people lived and labored away from shore, unseen by authorities or neighbors. The presence of children meant families had been brought along, not out of kindness, but to ensure compliance. People with children did not run easily. People with children accepted more. He stood and walked outside, needing air. The trees at the center of the island rustled faintly in the breeze. Beneath them, the ground was packed hard, marked by the repetition of many feet. Nearby, he noticed a series of identical containers stacked neatly beneath a tarp. He lifted the edge and revealed fishing gear far more extensive than he had first assumed. Nets of uniform size and make. Floats marked with the same symbol. This was no small operation. He followed the trail of logic further. If this place produced on a schedule, then the product went somewhere. He searched for signs of transport and found them along the outer edges of the platforms. Reinforced points where boats could dock. Scuffed wood where heavy loads had been moved repeatedly. Marks that showed a routine, not an emergency. Then he saw the gaps. Certain pages were missing. Torn out with care, not ripped in haste. Burned scraps lay in a metal container near one house. the ash still dark enough to suggest the fire had not been long ago. Someone had tried to erase parts of the story, but had not had time to erase it all. The implications pressed in on him, heavy and inescapable. This island had been discovered, or was about to be discovered. The people who ran it had acted quickly to remove those who could speak. They had left the structure behind, perhaps assuming it would drift away or be destroyed by weather before anyone noticed. He crouched near the edge of the platform and studied the water. The island had shifted position since his last visit. Not much, but enough to confirm that it was no longer properly anchored. It was moving, slowly but steadily, carried by forces that did not care what secrets it held. A sound reached him then, faint but sharp enough to cut through his thoughts. An engine, closer than before. He did not wait to confirm it visually this time. He gathered several of the most revealing pages, photographing them quickly with shaking hands before slipping a few originals into his sack. He did not take everything. Taking too much would be noticed. He took only what could not be easily replaced. As he made his way back to his boat, he caught sight of movement on the water. A vessel approaching from the direction of the shore, its wake narrow and controlled. Not a fisherman's boat. Not at this hour. He lowered himself, moving along the platform's edge, keeping the island's structures between himself and the approaching craft. His heart hammered in his chest, but his mind stayed focused. This was no longer about curiosity or even truth. This was about timing. He pushed off just as the sound of the engine grew clearer, letting the current take him before rowing hard in the opposite direction. He did not look back until the island was once again a distant shape, blurred by heat and light. By the time he reached shore, his hands were raw and his muscles burned, but he felt something else beneath the fear. Certainty. Whatever this place was, it was not meant to be found. And now that he had found it, the island and its secrets were already slipping away, carried by water toward a future where they might disappear forever if he did nothing. The certainty stayed with him long after he left the water behind. It settled into his movements, into the way he watched people on the shore, into the way he listened to conversations without appearing to listen at all. The island was no longer a question. It was an answer, and answers carried weight. He felt it in his shoulders as he hauled nets, in his chest as he sat through meals pretending to be tired rather than alert. Everything around him continued as if nothing had changed, but for him the world had shifted, and there was no place to set it back the way it had been. He spent the next day assembling the fragments in his mind, fitting them together with the patience he had learned from fishing. Nets only worked when every knot held. The same was true of truth. The notebooks, the ledgers, the uniform equipment, the missing pages. The island had not been a refuge for people pushed aside by the world. It had been a machine, quiet and efficient, built to extract value while keeping those who produced it out of sight. Families had lived there not because someone cared, but because families anchored people in place. The presence of children troubled him most. He had grown up knowing hardship, knowing that adults sometimes bent rules to survive, but children meant boundaries had been crossed deliberately. Someone had decided that keeping entire families on the water was acceptable, even useful. Someone had calculated the risk and decided it was worth it. He returned to the island again 2 days later, choosing a time when the weather promised cover. Low clouds muted the light, flattening the water into dull gray sheets. The approach felt heavier now, as though the island itself resisted him. It had drifted farther from its original position, its outlines shifted just enough to confirm that no one was tending it anymore, or that someone was letting it move on purpose. As he stepped onto the platform, the changes were immediately visible. One of the houses stood open wider than before, its door hanging crookedly from a single hinge. Inside, several items were gone. The neat stacks of containers had been disturbed, some removed entirely. The island was being stripped piece by piece. He moved carefully, cataloging the differences. Nets that had once been coiled and ready now lay scattered or missing. A crate he remembered clearly had been dragged closer to the edge, its contents emptied. Someone had been here since his last visit, and they had not been in a hurry. This was not abandonment, it was cleanup. He found the most telling clue in the same ledger he had examined before. One page, folded deep within the stack, bore a mark he had not noticed at first. A date circled heavily, followed by a brief notation written in a different hand. The ink was darker, the pressure stronger. Whatever it signified, it had mattered. He traced the line with his finger, comparing it to other entries. After that date, the records thinned abruptly. A few scattered notes, then nothing. No continuation, no closing, just absence. The meaning came to him with quiet force. That had been the night, the moment when the system broke its own rhythm, a scheduled interruption, a warning perhaps of a visit from the outside, inspection, inquiry, the kind of attention that could not be controlled. He imagined the sequence without wanting to. Orders given quickly, boats arriving after dark, people told to gather what they could carry, children woken roughly, confused and afraid, promises made, threats implied. The island emptied in hours, maybe less, and when it was done, the platform was cut loose, left to drift until weather or chance erased it. The sound of an engine interrupted his thoughts, sharper this time, closer. He did not freeze. He had learned better. He moved instead toward the trees at the center of the island, keeping low, using the trunks and hanging branches as cover. From there he watched. A boat approached from the western side, its engine idling low. Two men stood inside it, their posture relaxed but purposeful. They did not call out. They did not hesitate. They tied up where the platforms had been reinforced, where only someone familiar with the structure would choose to dock. The men moved through the island with the efficiency of owners. They checked houses, opened containers, kicked aside debris. One of them cursed when he found a box empty, his voice carrying clearly across the water. The other responded briefly, gesturing toward the remaining structures. They were not searching for people. They were searching for what people had left behind. He watched them enter the house where the ledgers had been stored. His pulse thudded in his ears as he pressed himself deeper into the shadows. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of wood beneath their boots, the rustle of paper, the slap of water against the platforms. If they found what he had missed, the story would end here. If they suspected someone else had been there, it would not end quietly. Minutes passed, stretched thin by fear. Finally, the men emerged carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Not everything, then. Not enough. They moved back toward their boat, speaking in low voices he could not hear clearly. One glanced around the island once more, scanning the water. For a moment, the man's gaze lingered near the trees. The boy held his breath, counting silently, willing his body to remain still. The gaze moved on. When the engine started again, he did not relax. He waited until the sound faded, until the water smoothed itself back into false calm. Only then did he allow himself to move, retreating the way he had come, careful not to disturb branches or boards. He did not stay to look for more. He did not need to. What he had seen confirmed everything. The island was not forgotten. It was being erased. As he pushed off, his hands trembling despite his effort to control them, a new understanding settled over him. The danger was no longer abstract. It had faces now, voices, a method. Whoever had built the island intended to make sure it told no stories. By the time he reached open water, the fear had hardened into something else. Determination, sharpened by urgency. The island would not wait, and neither could he. After that day, the shore no longer felt like safety. It felt like exposure. He noticed it first in small things, the kind that could easily be dismissed if he had not already learned to pay attention. A boat moored where it had never been before. A man standing too long near the water, pretending to mend a net that did not need mending. Conversations that paused the moment he came close, then resumed in quieter tones. No one confronted him. No one asked direct questions, but the air around the village had shifted, tightening like a net being drawn, slowly closed. He forced himself to behave as usual. He went out on the water each morning, brought back his catch, helped his family as he always had. He spoke little, blamed tiredness when his thoughts wandered. Inside, however, he was measuring every glance, every movement. The men he had seen on the island had not worn uniforms. They had not acted like officials. They had moved like people who were used to solving problems quietly. His family remained unaware of how close danger had come to them, and that ignorance became his greatest fear. They depended on him not just for fish, but for steadiness. Any sign of trouble could unravel everything. He watched his mother count coins at night, rearranging the same small pile again and again, as if it might grow. He listened to his father cough through the walls, pretending it was nothing. This was what he stood to lose if he made the wrong move. The pressure increased subtly but steadily. One afternoon, as he returned earlier than usual, a man he barely knew asked where he had been fishing lately. The question was casual, almost friendly, but it lingered too long in the air. He answered with a vague reference to familiar waters and moved on, his pulse quickening only after he was out of sight. That night he noticed a boat passing the shoreline long after dark, its engine throttled low. It did not stop, but it did not hurry either. It traced the edge of the village as if mapping it, then disappeared into the distance. He lay awake afterward, listening to the water, replaying every choice he had made since first seeing the island. He understood then that doing nothing was no longer neutral. Silence did not mean safety. It meant waiting for someone else to act first. He began to prepare without telling anyone. He divided the materials he had taken from the island, hiding them in separate places where they would not be found together. A few pages wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath a loose stone near the shore. Photographs saved and copied, stored where he knew only he would look. The notebook returned briefly to its hiding place beneath the floorboard, then moved again when he decided even that was too obvious. He practiced telling the story in his head, not as a confession, but as a report. Facts, not emotions. Dates, locations, patterns. He stripped it down to what could not be argued away. The island existed. People lived there. Records proved labor and control. Someone removed them by force or threat. Someone was now erasing what remained. The question was not whether to speak, it was how. The local authorities were not an option. Everyone knew that. The village had learned long ago which problems could be solved nearby and which ones disappeared into offices and never returned. If the people behind the island had operated this openly for so long, they did not do it without protection. He thought instead of distance, of people who did not depend on the village for their livelihoods, of voices loud enough that they could not be silenced easily. A journalist from the city who sometimes passed through, an inspection office responsible for waterways and labor that reported far from here. Someone who would see the island not as an inconvenience, but as evidence. Time, however, was not on his side. Each day the island drifted farther. From certain points along the shore, he could no longer see it at all. The current had shifted, carrying it toward deeper water, or toward whoever still wanted to finish dismantling it. The thought that the last physical proof might vanish beneath the waves made his chest tighten with urgency. He decided there would be one more trip. It was the most dangerous choice he had made so far, and he knew it. But without something undeniable, something that could not be dismissed as rumor or misunderstanding, his story would be fragile. He needed a final piece, a cornerstone strong enough to support everything else. He waited for a day when the wind picked up, when the water grew restless enough to mask smaller sounds. He told his family he would be gone longer, blamed a change in fish patterns. They accepted it without question. They had learned not to ask when answers would not help. On the water, he moved carefully, avoiding the direct route. He scanned the horizon constantly, alert for engines, for wakes that did not belong. When the island came into view at last, it looked smaller than before, its outline broken. Parts of it had already been taken apart. He tied his boat in the shadow of the platform and climbed aboard, every muscle tense. The silence here felt different now, thinner, like the pause before something final. He did not linger. He went straight to the places he believed would matter most. Inside one of the remaining houses, beneath a section of floor he had not checked before, he found it. A packet sealed in plastic, weighted to keep it from floating free. Inside were lists that went beyond tallies and shifts, names written fully this time, routes marked with coordinates, figures that showed payment and debt intertwined, designed to keep people trapped. This was the spine of the operation. The sound of an engine cut through the air. It was closer than he had feared, too close to escape unnoticed. He did not think. He acted. He shoved the packet into his sack, took photographs as quickly as his shaking hands allowed, then slid out through the back of the structure as footsteps hit the platform. Voices followed, sharp and irritated. Someone had realized something was wrong. He slipped into the water instead of running for the boat, letting himself sink just enough to move unseen beneath the platform. The cold stole his breath, but he forced it back, pushing silently until he reached his vessel. He hauled himself in, drenched and gasping, and cut away without starting the engine, letting the wind and current carry him until distance swallowed sound. He did not stop rowing until his arms burned and his lungs ached. Only then did he slow, hiding among rocks where the water broke irregularly, making pursuit difficult. By the time he reached shore again, the sun was low and his body shook from exhaustion and cold. He hid the new evidence immediately, splitting it as before, never keeping it all in one place. That night, as he sat alone and listened to the familiar sounds of the village, he understood something with brutal clarity. He was no longer just a witness. He was a threat, and threats, he had learned, were dealt with quickly. The next step would decide not only what happened to the island, but what happened to him and everyone he loved. He understood before the morning even came that there would be no more preparation after this. The night had drawn a line he could not step back across. The evidence was no longer something he could simply hide and think about. It was something that demanded motion. If he waited, others would move first and they would not be careful. He left the house as he always did, without ceremony, without explanation. The sky was low and heavy, the kind that pressed down on the water and blurred the horizon. It was good weather for what he intended. Wind and unsettled water hid sounds, softened outlines, made everything less precise. He dressed as he always did for fishing, nothing unusual, nothing that would stay in memory if someone tried to recall him later. The sack with the evidence lay hidden beneath the seat, wrapped and rewrapped so that water would not reach it. On the water, he avoided the direct route. He moved wide, using familiar currents to bend his path, letting the boat drift where drifting looked natural. He watched everything, every wake, every distant movement, every change in the surface that might signal a motor cutting through from behind. His muscles stayed tense, his hands steady only because fear sharpened them into focus. The island came into view gradually, its outline no longer whole. Sections of platform were gone now, removed cleanly, as if someone had taken care to reclaim what could be reused. One house leaned at an angle, its supports weakened. Another had been stripped nearly bare, walls exposed where planks had been taken. What remained looked less like a village and more like the bones of one. He tied off where shadows still clung to the structure and climbed aboard. The boards felt looser beneath his feet, the island less stable, as if it knew its time was almost finished. He did not waste a moment. He moved straight to the last intact structure, the one he had not searched fully before. He had saved it instinctively for the end. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Light fell in narrow bands through gaps in the walls, cutting the dust into visible lines. He dropped to his knees and worked quickly, prying loose a section of flooring with his knife. Beneath it, wrapped carefully and weighted against movement, was what he had hoped for and feared at the same time. The documents were heavier than he expected, not in weight but in meaning. Names written fully, no longer hidden behind numbers. Routes marked clearly, tracing lines from the island to points along the coast and beyond. Figures that showed how payment was delayed, reduced, reshaped into debt. A system designed not just to exploit labor, but to trap it. He photographed everything, forcing his hands to stay steady, his breathing slow. The sound of an engine reached him then, unmistakable and close. This time there was no doubt. The boat was approaching fast, its path direct. He could hear voices now, carried by the wind. There was no time to retreat the way he had before. He stuffed the documents into his sack, tied it tight, and moved toward the rear of the structure just as footsteps struck the platform outside. A shout followed, sharp with irritation. Someone had noticed the disturbed boards. He did not wait to hear more. He slipped into the water instead, letting the shock of cold drive the air from his lungs. For a moment, panic flared, bright and blinding. He forced it down, kicking gently, pulling himself beneath the platform where shadows and broken reflections hid him. Above, the men moved through the island, their voices tense now, raised in anger. One of them cursed loudly. Another demanded to know who else had been here. The wood groaned under their weight as they searched, boots striking where his bare feet had been moments before. He waited until their attention shifted, until the noise clustered away from his position. Then he surfaced quietly beside his boat and eased himself in, every movement calculated. He did not start the engine. He pushed off silently, letting the wind and current take him, using his oars only when distance dulled the sound of voices behind him. The pursuit came, but not immediately. When the engine finally roared to life again, he was already part of the broken pattern of waves near the rocks, where sound scattered and sight was unreliable. He kept low, rowing hard when he could, drifting when he had to, letting exhaustion burn through his arms without slowing him. By the time he reached the shore, his body was shaking, soaked through, scraped and bruised. He did not go home. He hid the evidence first, splitting it as he had learned to do, trusting no single place with the whole truth. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. The realization came quietly, settling over him like dusk. There would be no more visits to the island. Whatever remained there would be destroyed or taken soon. The story would either leave with him now, carried to people who could not ignore it, or it would sink with the platforms and disappear. As he finally made his way back toward the village, keeping to shadows and familiar paths, he felt something hard and clear take shape inside him. Fear was still there, heavy and real, but beneath it was resolve. He had done everything he could to keep the truth from drowning. The rest would depend on whether he was brave enough to let it reach shore. He waited until the village fell into its familiar rhythm again, the kind that lulled people into believing nothing truly changed. Nets were mended, boats came and went, voices rose and fell along the shore. From the outside, it looked the same as it always had. Inside him, everything had shifted. He no longer carried the evidence as weight alone. It had become direction. Every choice now pointed forward, narrowing the space in which hesitation could survive. He thought of the children's notebooks, of the names written out in full at last, of the routes that traced quiet lines between water and shore. He thought of the night when families had been gathered and taken away under promises or threats that would never be written down. And he thought of his own family, asleep a few steps away, unaware of how close the water had come to pulling him under for good. The choice was not dramatic in the way stories like to pretend choices were. There was no single moment of revelation, no sudden courage that erased fear. The fear stayed. It remained sharp and practical. It told him what he stood to lose. But fear was no longer the only voice. He began by preparing the story as carefully as he had prepared his nets all his life. He did not embellish. He did not speculate. He wrote down what he had seen, what he had touched, what he could prove. Dates, positions, distances, the way the island had drifted, the way the platforms had been dismantled piece by piece, the names and routes that formed the spine of the operation. He stripped the narrative of emotion until only facts remained, because facts were harder to drown. He chose distance over confrontation. The local office was too close, too tangled in favors and silences. He remembered a journalist who had passed through months earlier, asking about fishing conditions and disappearing as quickly as he had come. He remembered the insignia of a regional inspection service painted on a truck once, far from here, and how people had watched it with unease until it left. These were not saviors. They were tools, and tools, if used carefully, could cut through things that hands alone could not. He did not hand everything over at once. He sent fragments first, anonymously, through channels that did not lead directly back to him. Photographs with coordinates. Copies of records without explanation. Enough to raise questions, not enough to expose him immediately. He waited, listening, watching. The response did not come as thunder. It came as ripples. A call placed to someone in the village who did not expect it. A boat that did not belong docking briefly along the far shore. People asking questions that sounded official even when spoken quietly. The men who had watched the water too closely began to watch each other instead. Only then did he release the rest. When he finally met the person who would carry the story beyond the reach of the water, he did so away from the village, in a place where the wind and waves could swallow voices. He did not give his name. He did not need to. He gave the evidence, methodically, explaining just enough to make the documents speak for themselves. He watched the other man's expression change as the scope of it became clear. This was no rumor, no misunderstanding. This was a system. The days that followed were tense and uncertain. The island was reported officially, its coordinates logged, its existence no longer something that could be denied quietly. Boats went out to find it, not to erase it, but to mark what remained. By then, much had already been taken or destroyed, but not enough. The current had carried the platforms closer to open water, but the truth had already reached land. The village felt smaller during that time, its familiar paths narrowed by whispers and half-finished conversations. His family sensed that something was wrong, even if they did not yet understand what. When he finally told them part of it, he chose his words carefully. He did not describe the danger in detail. He spoke instead of responsibility, of people who had been treated as invisible, of a choice that could not be undone. There was fear in their eyes, but there was also recognition. They had lived close enough to the edge all their lives to understand what silence could cost. The backlash, when it came, was uneven and incomplete. Some names disappeared from the water. Some routes went quiet. Others tried to shift, to adapt, to pretend nothing had happened. But the operation had lost its greatest protection. It was no longer unseen. Investigations moved slowly, imperfectly, but they moved. That alone changed everything. One evening, weeks later, he stood on the shore and watched the water where the island had once been visible. There was nothing there now. No roofs, no trees, no platforms groaning under their own weight. The water had reclaimed it, or others had finished what they started. It did not matter anymore. What mattered was that the island no longer belonged only to the water. It belonged to records and memories and questions that would not go away. It belonged to the people who had lived there, whose names now existed beyond scraps of paper hidden beneath rotting boards. He felt older as he turned away, not in the way of years, but in the way of knowledge. Childhood had ended quietly, without ceremony, somewhere between the first silhouette on the horizon and the last document passed into waiting hands. He would still fish. He would still help his family survive. The water would still demand respect and attention. But he would never again believe that what happened far from shore could not reach him. The surface of the water was calm that night, reflecting the sky in broken fragments of light. Beneath it, currents moved steadily, carrying things away, bringing others closer. He understood now that truth moved the same way. It could be delayed, diverted, even submerged for a time. But if it found a path, if someone was willing to follow it long enough, it would always find its way back to land.